How are we doing, YouTube? It's your friendly gamer SmartEntity here. Welcome to my Prisma Gorgon review. Now, I actually had this weapon format 6 times or level to 37 times a couple weeks ago. So since the weapon came out, I got it immediately and I was playing with it. The reason I waited this long to do a video review on it was because I was waiting for a catalyst. And now that I've got a catalyst, I just cannot bring myself to potato this at this stage. Now, this is a mid-tier weapon for all intents and purposes. It is from the Void Trader. It costs a lot of Ducats, it costs a decent amount of credits, and it's definitely worth your time getting. Now, as far as where this weapon fall on the Warframe hierarchy, I'm going to tell you it is a mid-tier weapon. It's a pretty good mid-tier weapon, but it's definitely not top-tier. Weapons such as the Forma Prime is overall much better, and weapons like the Boulder Prime is so slightly different. It is again better for utility and mission objective completion goals. So I'm going to jump into Warframe Builder here so we can have a pretty good idea of how this weapon compares to some of the other stuff. Now obviously this is much better than the standard Gorgon, so I'm going to compare with the Gorgon Wraith. So the Prisma Gorgon, the main difference between the Prisma and the Gorgon Wraith that really makes it stand out is actually the crit. Now I'm going to actually compare the two weapons over here.
The balance of power
Actually, before I proceed, holy shit, there was a catalyst. I'm gonna end this video, play the catalyst, and I'll come back. Give me a sec, guys. Alrighty, so after a couple of seconds of internet magic, we were able to complete this invasion and eventually get the catalyst blueprint. So let's get back into it. Now what I was going to say before I ended the video was, if you have invested in a couple Prisma Gorgons, i.e. you want to sell it later on for plat or whatever, do be very careful not to accidentally equip it like I did. So this is a normal Prisma Gorgon I run with. I formatted 6 times. And this other Gorgon, I literally took it to one mission, obviously interception for some red farm, and it went to rank 30. It literally just went to that one mission. Now I have tried to contact DE, I sent a support ticket trying to get them to reset this weapon so I can trade it, and that request was declined, so they will not reset this for me. Now I don't blame them, it was my fault, so that's the end of that. But yeah, just again, be very careful not to accidentally equip these, because once you level it, once you do anything to it, you cannot trade it anymore. Alright, so now let's get back into it. Now what I was going to do was compare it with the Gorgon Wraith. So we got Prisma on the left and Wraith on the right, and do a quick calculation. So base damage, that's 6.3, 25.1, so 25.1 base for the Prisma Gorgon and 27 base for the Gorgon Wraith. So Gorgon Wraith do have a slightly higher base damage, but because the Prisma has a higher crit chance of 15% as well as a crit multiplier of 2 versus a 1.5, the Prisma Gorgon does overgive a much higher DPS potential just because of the crit. Now of course on top of that we do have other benefits, so we got better accuracy, we got a better magazine capacity, and what you don't see here is we also have a much higher magazine or ammo reserve. So the Wraith has slightly higher status, but who cares. Now the fire rate of the Gorgon Wraith is also lower than the Prisma Gorgon. One of the characteristics of the Gorgon family, if you like, is that it has a spool up speed, as in takes a while, it takes a few bullets before you reach maximum fire rate. So a slightly higher fire rate do help a little bit, but in gameplay that is still pretty slow.
Check navigation for active invasions.
Now in the past when I show off builds, I have from time to time been criticized for not showing the highest DPS builds. 2 main reasons for that. The first reason is the highest number shown here isn't necessarily the most optimized build, i.e. the best build for practical gameplay. The second reason is, well, simply put, I made a mistake. Now the last mistake that I made namingly is at times I forgot or I forget about the puncture and slash elemental mods. So for example, sometimes I will use a 60% elemental mod such as high voltage instead of using a 120% slash or puncture mod for a weapon that is predominantly doing puncture or slash damage. For this occasion we won't have to worry about that because both the Gorgon Wraith as well as the Prisma Gorgon have high impact damage, so no event mods are applicable. Okay, so we have a crit build for the Prisma Gorgon. Now, despite a 15% crit chance, which, to be fair, is higher than a non-crit weapon, but it's a bit lower to be called a crit weapon, because if you look at some of the other weapons, a 25% crit chance is sort of my rule of thumb to go. But for this particular weapon, because they also have a crit multiplier of 2, using a crit build does provide a much better damage or DPS compared to a non-crit build. And just to show off that now, so again, we have the Prisma Gorgon with a standard crit build. We got 1700 total damage versus a 18,000 sustained DPS. If we switch that for 2 elemental mods, we significantly drop in damage to a mere 12,000 total damage and a 12.8 thousand sustained DPS. And of course, the reason for that is because when you do achieve a crit, that crit damage is obviously base damage, which means that other elemental mods benefit from it. If you use extra elemental mods such as high voltage or core rounds, it benefits the serration and the heavy caliber and the split chamber, but the elementals doesn't benefit each other directly. And for the Gorgon Wraith, if we use the same build, i.e. a crit build, we get a much lower damage value. Again, that's because of the lower crit chance as well as the lower crit multiplier. Now, you can argue you can use a elemental build. Now, using an elemental build on this weapon pretty much gives you the same value. So I have an elemental build over here. So I got 1200 total damage versus a 11,000 sustained DPS. And if we switch over to a crit build, we get a slightly higher number overall, but not that significant. And to be honest, I would actually recommend using something like a 4 elemental plus a speed trigger build. So we'll find speed trigger over here. Now with speed trigger, we actually get a much lower total damage, not surprisingly, but a slightly higher sustained DPS versus 5 elementals. Because, well, we got better speed trigger, even though it doesn't increase damage, it does help with a base damage because it's fire rate. And the reason I like to use speed trigger on something like the Gorgon Wraith is because of that spool up with all Gorgons, so it does increase spool up speed, make that shorter, so it allows you to reach maximum fire rate much faster. But if you don't like to use speed trigger, especially if you are high level using this weapon and you don't want to run out of bullets too fast, it's fine to put some high voltage on here. You drop sustained DPS a little bit, but not that significant. Now, some of you may say, why do I want to use a pure elemental build versus a crit build, despite a crit build giving better damage value on the Gorgon Wraith? Now, before I started the video, I did this quick drawing on paint. So basically what this is a normal distribution, right? So the x-axis over here is total damage versus the y-axis over here, well, that is a line, which is basically your probability. Now, this curve over here is basically the elemental build. This curve over here is the crit build. So what that means is, yes, with a crit build, you get a higher mean. But you also get larger standard deviations with a crit build, which means you get a higher mean, as in you get a higher average total damage, but you're also more likely, compared to the elemental build, to do lower damage values, as well as higher damage values. Of course, this is all RNG and whatnot, but the reason I like to use a elemental build is because despite it doing a lower mean damage, it's more reliable. As in, if you're facing enemies, in this game, enemies are pretty weak. If you're facing enemies on the solar map, just regular, level 20 to 30 enemies, you can pretty much one-shot most enemies with a Gorgon Wraith with an elemental build anyway. Whereas with a crit build, you are going to do more damage overall to things like heavy gunners, but if you're facing basic enemies, there's more likely chance that you don't do a one-shot because you're in this bracket over here, right? Obviously, you can do this bracket over here with equal probability, but if they're gonna die with, say, this amount of damage anyway, there's no point doing damage, whereas you're more likely to do lower damage. So that's why I prefer using a elemental build. Now, if that's too confusing for you, don't worry about it, just ignore it. And you can use an elemental build or a crit build, doesn't really matter. It's very sort of fine art in that one, so just go with the elemental or a crit build, doesn't matter that much, or if you can use speed trigger as well, it doesn't really matter. But the main point I'm trying to show here is the Prisma Gorgon is much better than the Gorgon Wraith. And of course we all know the Gorgon Wraith itself is a okay mid-tier weapon, pretty on the lower side. So Prisma Gorgon is much better on the higher side of the mid-tier range. Now, just to give you guys a bit of a comparison, I have a Soma Prime video review. Definitely have a look at that. That is the best overall weapon in the game right now, especially for lower level gameplay. If you're doing high level gameplay, so versus enemies greater than level 100, so that's your kind of wave 50 plus defense or 60-minute plus T4 T3 survival. So Opticore is simply put better, just because it can still do that high damage, plus it has extremely good ammo economy. So just to put things into perspective, if we look at the Soma Prime build with exactly the same build as this, you're looking at a total damage of about just under 1900. It's basically 1886.29 total damage, and it got a burst DPS of 28294.35 and a sustained DPS of 23,997.43. So overall it's much better. But again, what we don't see here is the Soma Prime have a much higher spool up speed as well, and as far as ammo, total ammo capacity goes, it's about the same between these two weapons, but the Soma Prime do have a ammo magazine size of 200, which is slightly higher than the Prisma Gorgon, I believe. Yeah, so the Prisma Gorgon only have a magazine capacity of 12 of 120. And what I also want to show you guys is basically the fire. Now, so again, the build I have is split chamber, heavy caliber, serration, and hellfire all maxed. So if we look at about 20 meter, now see that spool up speed? So once you reach the spool up speed, even if you stop firing, you get pretty decent fire rate. But if you leave it for a while, if you reload, the spool up speed of this weapon is pretty slow, right? Pretty slow, despite it being higher than the Gorgon Wraith. Now, as far as the spread of bullets goes, it's pretty huge, right? I mean, obviously I got a max heavy caliber on here, which is the build you're supposed to use, but the spread is pretty huge, and we're only at 20 meters. If we're going to somewhere like 60 meters, or even 40 meters, the spread will just be crazy, right? So it's not really for long range. It's perfectly fine for mid range, but for long range it's just not up there. Now I'm not gonna do too much enemy killing or damaging, just because I don't have an optimized build here, and it's a bit pointless to do that. Alright, so as far as rating goes, for low level speed kill, it doesn't really kill anything that fast. It has a decent rate of fire, but because of spool up speed, it's just not that good. As far as high level utility, unless you've been putting this weapon on your back and been using a secondary through the whole 60 minute, by the time you get to 60 minute, if you've been using this weapon, you will not have any bullets left. The damage is low, so you are forced to keep on firing, and the fire rate is pretty high. It's not very ammo economic at all. So by the time you even get to high level, if you've been using this weapon at all during the mission, you'll be out of bullets. So I give it a 4 because it has, the damage, but it's just not up there, and it just doesn't have the ammo economy for a high level. As far as AoE potential, it doesn't have any AoE potential. Yes, you can use a high rate of fire to spray bullets, but again, you'd be out of bullets so fast. Not to mention magazine size is only 120 versus my Soma Prime, which is 200. Subjective factor, I mean, it's not original, right? We've had plenty of Gorgon variants before. As far as the enjoyment factors go, I just didn't enjoy it. The large spread or inaccuracy, as well as the spool up speed, and having been using the Soma Prime pretty much continuously for the past couple of weeks, having had to switch to this weapon, it was just a real letdown. So overall, I give it a 3. And it really takes a rating scale to show myself that yep, this weapon just isn't worth a potato unless you got a reserve, unless you're quite relaxed with plat spending, unless you just love this weapon. It's gonna be there collecting dust for quite a while. And the saddest part is I got 2 of them, right? I got 4 I can sell to, but the other 2, well, let it collect dust. Alright guys, please like, comment, and subscribe. I know I haven't put a potato in this, so I know I'm gonna get a few comments saying how can I do a review with a potato, but hopefully with all the numbers I've shown you guys, you can understand why I didn't put the potato in this one. Alright guys, cheers. I'll see you guys in the next video.